Okay, welcome back. Hope we all had a great break. I'm Jeffery Newton. For those of you that don't know me, I'm applications consultant. I have the dubious honor of being the oldest, maybe not the oldest, but the longest running person at this job. But I just wanted to introduce.
Why'd you look at me like that?
What? Ow! I did not. Anyways, this is the rest of the applications consultant team. If you haven't met me, then you've definitely probably met one of these folks as well. But we are going to do the top 11 mistakes that we find new clients make, just the things that, as we finished up on a site, we're like, I really wish you hadn't done that, but we got through it. So from the oldest to the, from the longest running to the newest, I'm going to have Kathy do our presentation and prompt us for the questions.
Okay, all right. And I don't know if you know all the ACs. I'll start here with Nick Bogart. Jeffery Newton. Yeah, go ahead and clap. They're really good. Myra Spengler and Eric Homeier. And I'm Kathy Moeller. I'm the newest one. Only been here a couple months, so they know way better, a lot more than I know. So Jeffery did mention we're going to do the top 11 mistakes that customers can make during an Adept implementation and an upgrade. And then after that, we also are going to cover some of the questions that some of you submitted before even arriving here. And we're going to try and get through as many as we can. And if there were any questions in the end there that we didn't cover that you would have submitted, surely, grab one of us out in the hallway here, or we'll get a chance to chat later today, tomorrow, and tonight. Okay? So let's get started. Let's go to first of all, saying that our presenters totally have 40 years of experience as application consultants. And they live all over the US and travel all over the world, wherever you need them. Okay? All right. So based on, and it still says 10 here, we actually added one more late in the game here. That's okay. And they are in no particular order. Number one, there are too many Adept administrators. And I'll let Jeffery talk to that one.
Sure. I mean, one of the things we run into a lot is everyone feels someone needs a lot of input. You may not be able to decide which group does, which representative does. So you end up with a lot of people with those administrative rights thinking they're going to need to be in there. The other mistake is that you don't want to control the rights people have, so you just keep bumping them up until they can do what they say they need to do. The big problem with this is you don't have a clear line of control. You don't know who is going to be able to make a decision, or you have too many people making decisions that are counteract each other. As well, you're going to end up with the issue that you've got people who are doing, a handful of people who are doing work day to day with rights that the rest of their cohorts don't have. And then you don't really get an idea of what's going wrong with the system because you're like, well, I can do it, why can't you? So that's a big reason to really pare them down, have one primary administrator, and really only elevate rights for the position as they need them. Make them a library administrator, make them a workflow administrator, pick those rights instead of just giving them the whole farm.
Okay, sound good. Thanks, Jeffery.
We're not. Okay. Hey, last minute
Number
tech changes.
two, not enough Adept licenses. And let's have Myra speak to that one.
I almost got a no in my face.
Okay, they're just
Sorry about that. No. Yes, I'm going to answer that question. So, yeah, the one thing you don't want to do is under-purchase Adept licenses. What we typically would recommend is that make sure that you have one license for every CAD user. In addition to that, you want to figure on about approximately 10% on the rest of your desktop client user base, and then another like 10 to 20% for your Explorer reviewer user base. You don't really want to paint yourself into a corner where you're going to have users that can't log into the system. They can't log in. That means they can't get to their files. They can't make changes. You get project delays. And if that happens on a regular basis, users are not going to even try to log into Adept. So they're going to not use it and just work outside of Adept, which kind of is counterintuitive to Adept to begin with.
Okay, thank you, Myra.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, cut the application consultant on-site days to save money. All right, how about Nick for that one?
I'm going to steal from Erlene's presentation on the Would You Rather. Do you want your Adept installed like it's drawn on a napkin, or do you want it installed and implemented like it's a fully vetted, reviewed drawing? Okay? Yes, we realize that sometimes it can, the money that it costs to have us on site can cost a lot, but it's of very high value to you as well. And I'm not, that's, for the lack of sounding arrogant, I mean that truly.
We've definitely left sites where we felt rushed, and at the end we see the results of, it wasn't just me that felt rushed, you've been back to talk to us more often than we feel you would have been if. It's like, hey, if I just had 3 more days, you know, if I had those days I thought I was going to have, you know, I'd have gotten there.
Okay, thank you very much, both Nick and Jeffrey. And number 4, opt for manual file migration versus custom migration. And Eric, how about if you speak to that?
Okay. So the decision making on whether or not you're going to go with a file migration versus a manual migration tends to be one that we hear often. And there's advantages to getting it done manually in the sense that you have someone there who's on hand to clean things up as we're moving along. But there's also an even larger advantage sometimes to doing it programmatically. The fact that that's done off-site, it's kind of done in the background. It's not done while we're taking all your people out. I think that's one of the biggest advantages is if we do it manually, then we're there, but your users we have to lock your users out of access to those files while we're cleaning them up, rather than having it done programmatically where we can get a lot of that up front done and then migrate your files once and then just go right into implementation. So there's some really clear advantages to doing it programmatically. Sometimes, though, the ways you weigh the balances and you say which one's better, sometimes manual is just a way to go, but there are definite clear advantages to doing it programmatically.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Number 5, perceived requirements. And let's go with Nick on this one.
This is one that's near and dear to my heart. Oftentimes, the way that your users have been doing it forever and ever and ever becomes a perceived requirement. So when we start doing the IPD, people are like, we've always done it this way is the way it has to be done, right? So that creates a ton of problems because Adept, while we can do it, you don't want to just be stuck in the same old, same old. You want to innovate for change, you want to concise, you want to be efficient as possible, and so think outside of the box. Perceived requirement may not be an actual requirement.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And next, number 6, confusing functionality across the products. Jeffrey?
I mean, the number of times that I sat there and someone has said, I know Craig showed me that this would work this way. I'm positive he showed me this command. Why can't, no. It doesn't happen that often, but really what we've got is we know you go through a lot. We know clients go through a lot when they're vetting software. So we'd like to think we're the only game in town, but we know you've asked at least one other person, what would you use? You've seen things that aren't necessarily in Adept. And you're sitting there wondering why we're not doing it or why we're not able to do it. So all I'll say is take that minute when you've made your decision, when you've naturally come on board, and really review what it is we're doing, what you're expecting, what your expectations are, your perceived or otherwise, and make sure that you have your head in the game again for this is what it's going to do for us. These are the things we want to do. Mostly before you start planning too much. Because it's really hard when I sit down with you or one of us sits down with you and you've already laid out your workflows or your roadmaps or what your libraries are going to look like based on something that you sort of miscommunicated what the product is going to do for you.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Number 7, no clear picture of where users actually store their files. Eric, how about you for this one?
Okay. Knowing where someone stores their files is extremely important. It's one of the things I think that gets left behind in the prep work to moving forward to a implementation, for example. It causes several different things. It causes a slowdown when you're trying to implement because now we're at last-minute game trying to find out where some of these files are, especially when you scan and sync files into the system and there are missing children, things like that. But it also causes a little bit of angst, I think, for users who, as you start to bring them into the system, want to get to files now because we've told them they can get to their files, and their files aren't there. And it could be because another department stores them somewhere else. We didn't even think that they were storing them there. It could be on someone's C drive because that's where they stored their files. things like that. So it's really crucial before you get to the point of what are we going to bring into Adept? It's really crucial that you kind of interview everybody and say, where are the files that you access? Where do you go to start working on files? Rather than just naturally assuming that everyone is putting them where they are technically supposed to be putting them. They may not be in that location. So it's really important to kind of get that pre-work done ahead of time, see where those files are, and try and get them all in at once, rather than giving users the perception that Adept isn't going to work for them because their stuff's not there. And some things are, and some things aren't, and where do I go for them? And no one wants to be in that split decision, where do I look for them?
All right, thank you, Eric. Number 8, not cleaning up junk data. Jeffrey.
See this, whether you're doing programmatic migration or manual migration, this becomes something a lot of people end up tripping over. And when I'm not talking about getting in and cleaning up your duplicate files or the files where you have multiple copies or different names, we're really talking about the leftovers, the back files, the temp files, plot logs if you're not using them.
Thumbs.db.
A huge one, right. It takes time to process through them, even if you're going to go through and say, I don't want to touch it. So if you do put some of that upfront time, or, it's going to be from the time you decide you're going to do the migration to the time you actually do it, and get those files cleaned up, get them out of that location. And of course, something we can help you with if you talk to us before you're doing it. That can really save a lot of time, not only on that front-end loading, but then if you don't do it, you've got to clean them out at some point, and it just takes time to hit the button and remove them. Saving a couple hours out of a day is enough to make a difference in what you're doing. Not to mention your client experience. If they're gonna, your clients, your people you're working with, they've got to go in and they're stumbling over these. They're stumbling over backup copies of drawings and they're not sure which is which. That's just things we don't want them to have to find that would have been easy to deal with.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thank you. Number 9, not setting up a sandbox Adept environment. And Myra.
I love this topic. I really love when our customers have a sandbox environment. It enables you in the upgrade environment. It enables you to kind of dry run through your upgrade process and allows you to identify any potential problems that may arise. In addition to that, it's going to allow your users to go. You would typically assign 1 or 2 users go in and test the environment. As we migrate and evolve our software, things will change, functionality is going to change. So it allows the customers to identify any things like that may, functionality that change, that may impact the user community and might require additional user training. We also do it a lot in new environments, new implementations. I find that useful too because when we're in the design process of your production environment, we're doing a lot of changing. And we're identifying for the customer what works, what doesn't work. Well, sometimes you end with some garbage in that type of environment. It's stuff you don't necessarily want to bring into a live production environment. So it allows us to identify that stuff. So when we're done, we take the good stuff and we start your production environment and we're ready to go full steam ahead.
It also provides you an ability or an environment to provide training. So you don't have to be afraid of your new users messing everything up.
Thanks. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, it does not. No, it does not. You are able to install both a test environment, a development environment, and a production environment if that's what you want to do. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, all 3 of you. Good question and answers. All right, next, number 10. Not understanding when to delete files when deleting records. And let's go with Eric on this one.
Okay. So deleting files in Adept, I gotta say one thing actually that has changed that a lot of people don't know in 2018 is there used to be when you deleted files that the dialog box would pop up and there's a checkbox that says to delete the file when deleting record, right? That has been, in the past, somewhat of a problem because a lot of people don't check that little box at the very top, in which case what gets left behind is a file on the server, which the intent was that you can now go back, take that, and move it to another location. But if you're not paying attention, those files are still there. So later on down the road, you go to add files to the system, you get a CD from a vendor or from a customer, and you put them through the back door, let's say, and scan and sync them in, and you get a whole bunch of other files that show up that you didn't plan on. Those are files that were deleted without deleting the file from the system. Now in 2018, that checkbox isn't there on in files. When you go to delete a file now in 2018, it actually physically deletes the file from the server, okay? So you're going to want to copy that file out first if you're looking to hold on to it for something else, but you want it out of Adept. My recommendation is always playing that balance of, do I really want to get rid of it right now? Or is it my intent that I just don't want the users to see it? In which case, I always recommend that you create an archive vault or an archive library and move those over there. That way, if anyone decides they need it later on, you can very easily just take it and move it back to a library that they have access to. Right? And the tricky part is that acts a little bit differently in 2018 in the sense of files that are on review or hold, because the checkbox is now there magically, but the difference is the checkbox is now saying, do you want to delete all versions of this file, or do you want to delete the one on hold? And then if you don't press it, a little dialog box pops up after that that says, just so you know, you may or may not be deleting all the files. Please go back and look and make sure you check the box if you wanted to check the box, or be aware that if you didn't, you're not deleting all files, you're just deleting the one that's on hold, right?
Okay, thanks, Eric. Number 11, not establishing and testing backup procedures. Nick.
Another one of my favorites. I think all of us on this stage and probably everyone of help desk has interacted with a client that does not back up their system. It's a shame, okay? So I can't say enough, okay? Once you establish a backup procedure, we call it disaster recovery, okay? Once you have a disaster recovery plan in place, you want to test it, okay? You want to verify that the DR plan or disaster recovery plan works before you have a real disaster. Trust me.
Okay, thank you, Nick. That ends the first part of this session, our talk here on the 11 mistakes. Started out as 10, right? And now we're moving on to those questions that you would have submitted before arriving here. And again, we're going to do as many as we can in the time we have. Did you guys want to take a couple questions on the first part? Or?
Sure, why not? You guys have any questions?
So how about if there's like maybe just a few questions that you want to ask them on the 10 mistakes or 11 mistakes that we just discussed, or if you know of a 12th one, that's okay too. You can tell us about it. All right. Okay, down here, do we have a microphone?
Do we have a runner?
Or a runner here? Oh, here, right in the front here.
The ACs are involved and everyone leaves us. Like, oh, they can handle this.
Yes.
So I was wondering if there was a way that you could do a scan on the server for any file records that exist without the file being active in Adept, so you could clean up. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So with a caveat, if you've gone to AFS, the AFS file system, you can do a report in there in the dashboard that searches for all files there's the status of all the files. The status that will come up will be a file that doesn't link to a record in Adept. So what you do is you export the report and then you just parse out that error. So when in the dashboard you run, find all the files. You may find other issues like the library's missing or something like that, but you just parse it out and say, just show me ones that say, I found a file, there's no record in Adept. Those are your problem files.
Thanks.
I've done that a couple times now. It was something we could never do before. So it's really handy to be able to go back and check.
Okay, anybody else have a question? I see one in the back. Wait, what's his name? Starlord? What's his name? Starlord. I was close.
So this isn't, okay, so this isn't necessarily a question. I want to kind of add on to what Jeff was saying earlier about rights. And I made this mistake. And Jeff, when you were on site, I promised you that I would keep updating that rights table thing. If you guys set up a rights table, simple Excel document, keep it updated. It's really easy to go through and add groups and change rights, and I'll update the rights table later. And now all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 different groups that are really doing the same thing, but not all of the users are in the same group, and now you're trying to troubleshoot permissions, and it gets really frustrating really easily.
Great advice.
Thank you. One more question before we move on? Anybody else? Up front here in the middle?
Just to follow up on that one, is there a way you could run a quick report saying who you have in the system, what their rights are, and what groups they belong to?
There's a new report now for groups that you can run that actually gives you the users that are in those groups and their rights. Yep, it's in the system report list.
And that is one of the 15 questions we're about to answer. So thanks for.
Check.
What was the name of that one, Eric? It's called the user group report.
It's a user group report, yep.
Okay, we're good to move on? All right. If not, we can talk later, right? All right. So again, we're going to cover as many as we can the time we're allotted, and of course we'll have some time for questions as well. So what is the lead time to install Adept?
Typically it's 2 weeks, 5 days for admin training, 3 days for IPD and write-up, 2 days for implementation, for a basic implementation, okay? And then it branches out from there. But that's the typical install/implementation time frame.
Okay, good. What's the best way to roll out the updates?
That's me, yes. So we really are trying to push people towards push installers. I didn't want to use that word twice. What are you got the names of them? So I mean, group policy is a good one.
SCCM, ZenWorks, drawing a blank.
Oh, sure, but those kind of products. I mean, we have inside of Adept the Adept client rollout tool with Adept update. Thank you. But as you, I forget the name. We're trying not to push people towards it. It has a lot of problems getting through all the new rights with Windows, all the network rights coming along, having to have users elevated to install things. I mean, there's just so many pieces of security we've put in place. Having a real tool that does that job, just like Adept is great at document management, there are other products that are good at rolling out software, and we recommend you do something like that. It also really helps with the prerequisites, because then you can ensure that .NET and your VC++ get rolled out to those machines, because even with the Adept update, we can't push those automatically.
Okay, great. The next question is, what is the most frequent question of new users?
Well, in my opinion, the most frequent question that I get is, how do I check out? And I know that's like super simple, or what happens when I check out, okay? So when you check out, it's a copy. When you check in, it's a move, okay? From the work area to the library or vice versa. That's the most frequent question that I get from new users.
I think the most frequent one I get is, what do I do when you leave? I think that's probably the most frequent one I get. And
What's your phone number?
and that's help desk.
Yeah.
Which are awesome. So
Yeah.
Anybody else on that? One real quick, any from the audience? What's your, real quick, anybody?
Any question you want to answer? Do you think we can answer? Not about design, not about what features are coming.
Right,
Just something
just a
that's
frequent question. Okay, that was your chance, you know. Okay. All right, on to the next one. Common features that are underutilized.
Workflow, transmittal, required fields, related fields, you know, all the core functionality that other than just the core installation.
Restricted list too.
Yeah, restricted list is a good one.
definitely find required fields to be one of the big ones
Yeah.
that are underutilized, for sure.
PDF extraction too. I find that that's underutilized quite often as well. A lot of people, especially if you've upgraded from, I forget which version, but 2013 or something like that, there was a new plugin introduced and users aren't aware of it. And it works really well.
Okay, great. What actually happens when I save an inventor file and check in?
I kind of stole the thunder on the previous question. What happens when you check it in is the file is actually moved from the work area to the library or to the first step of the workflow. Okay? Users get confused with that sometimes. They expect it to be left behind in the work area for whatever reason. It's important that you realize it's a move.
Okay. The children of that file.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that can also be concern to people is whether or not Adept is going to grab the children, move the children as well. By default, the system is designed to automatically grab all children of a top-level file and check them in at the same time. The reason for that is the last thing you want to do is check in a model that's based on a part and then have someone change the part after while someone's improving the model. So, but we almost always roll out where we force that to happen. Now, there is an option in there to turn that off if you so choose. It really, I gotta say, meant more for people who are doing things like adding children of ECO as an ECO or something like that, where the child document isn't critical to the design of the other document you've checked in.
I like to think of it as no child left behind. Otherwise, they end up on milk cartons, and then that's a mess.
Go W.
So
I don't know if you, I don't remember if you mentioned or not, but there's also a lot of extraction that's going on too when you're signing in your SolidWorks or Inventor files. You have your children, it's extracting, looking to see if anything needs to be updated. Depending on what, it's also going to be looking for properties to extract to see if that needs to be updated. And with the, if you have IDW or SLD DRWs, and you have FTS enabled, that's going to happen as well, I believe.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
I'd like to clarify one thing that Nick said. So if you really wanted to get technical, when you check the file in, it's not really a move. What it is, it's a copy to the server, and it's a delete.
You're right.
So that it's
It
actually
is,
that
yes.
file. The important thing is the file is actually still on the machine in the recycle bin. And so we've had cases where somebody does something, the file gets checked in, it's corrupted, something's wrong with it, we don't know what to do. If they haven't deleted or emptied the recycle bin, you can go in there and recover it. So I just wanted to point that out.
yeah, so one
Get
of
up
the
here, Chris.
Oh, man. So one of the things I always explain to people when the sign-in process or the check-in process, that's a good point, Chris, very good point, because what actually happens is we copy the file up to its location. If it's a checked library, it's a hold area, right? So it goes to that holding location, and what actually happens is we check for file size, date, and time to make sure that it moved correctly, and then we delete the one that's local, and then it goes to the recycle bin if it's a local work area. If it is not a local work area, there's no recycle bin on the server, guys. So unless you're tracking some undelete program that's running on your server, or you've got backups going every 5 minutes, there's no undelete when it's a network folder, right? So if it's a local folder, yes, went to the recycle bin. And that's by design, because if something happens to that file in between the transfer back and forth, there's something always left behind. If it went up to the server and the file size, date, and time didn't match, then it's still local to your work area, right? So that's the purpose of that, and it's by design.
Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, next set of questions. The best way to integrate data archive scans of old archiving.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. There's actually two different methods that I would use. There is actually an archive function within Adept. And what that will do is it's going to take your file, it's going to give it a status of archive, but it's actually going to take and physically move your files outside of Adept, leaving only the record there. That means that information is there, it's still searchable. There's a little drawback with that, because who's ever archiving it can put it anywhere, including their workstation. So if something happens that user leaves the company, you hope that if you have to restore those files, you still have access to that location where they archived them to. What I typically would recommend for customers is create, and you already mentioned this, create an actual library called Archive with limited access and just move the files to that location. That way they're always there and available. If you still want users to be able to search for that information but not really access them, just give them view-only access to it.
Okay, great. Is there a list of user levels, and what are their permissions?
Sure, yeah. I mean, a lot like the report that Eric mentioned with the groups, we do user lists as well. So I think in the group list, it shows the users attached to the group and what their permissions are in that group. What I'm going to say we don't have currently is just a user, and everywhere they have rights. That's still a right click in the system. So if you find the user under your user group library admin and choose properties of that user, that will show you every group they belong to and what rights they have in that group.
Did I see a hand go up?
Like popular demand, Harry Court was added back in 2018.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gene.
Okay, how do I search for text in the title block?
So this is kind of ambiguous. You can use full text search, of course. And if your title block is properly attributed or inventor properties or SolidWorks properties, you can use the search card and search any extracted field.
Just want to add on that though too, if you have multiple title blocks in your AutoCAD drawings, multiple tabs, we do have what's called extended information, where you could set it to, it will actually extract the extended information and it is searchable too.
On the memo field. Is there a reason why you can search all the fields except for the memo field in the quick search?
The memo field is searchable, but you have to enable that option globally, I
She
believe,
said
right?
quick search.
Oh, quick search. I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
thought you said memo. Sorry.
No, doing a quick search on memo field, I don't think you can do that.
Yeah, you can't do that,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
As far as a reason, I don't know of one, but Gene, did you? No. No,
Come on up here.
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
Well, technically, full text search isn't a column either, but you can do that in the quick search.
Yeah, we're not going to have. I mean, I think it's a good discussion to have offline as to sort of why one would be left out and one wouldn't be.
I wanted to comment on that, because I use the memo field, I do search it, but it doesn't have to be quick search. You can just bring up a data card and a search card,
Yes.
cite your text of your string of text, and it'll find it.
Sure, yeah, we're aware that it will work in that field exactly. I think what we're looking for is if I look for a word, I want to also look in, you know, across all fields, I want it to also include.
We're doing a ton of manual entry, and the memo helps us a lot.
Sure.
Right.
Okay, and this next question I think might be for each one of you, maybe a quick answer. How does it feel knowing you've impacted so many companies, bringing many people out of the technical Stone Age? How do you feel?
Does it go across?
Feels great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
It is really satisfying and fulfilling to, of course, hear compliments. But when we leave your site and you fill out the surveys that you get, we get that feedback. We take that feedback seriously, and it means a lot that you guys are satisfied with the product and that we like to know that we did a good job.
Yeah, and I mean, out of Stone Age, you see, not to say they were in the Stone Age, but you see a company like Torre who came here and said, hey, we were looking for one little piece, and 10 years later, I'm seeing him step up on stage and look at all the things he's done with the product since I showed up. Or I take Space Age. There, so many I can't remember them. Where I see people who just want to do so much, and from the moment they start using the software, you realize that they're able to do things they wanted to do because you put something in front of them. It is really a special thing.
It's also really rewarding for me after 2 years. A customer, after I've implemented them, comes back after 2 years and they still use it. They're still eager to learn and implement more and more features of Adept. That's like really satisfying.
Anybody else?
Are you going next?
Just to add to that, I think something as simple as being able to view and do in red lines live in the system is truly amazing for some people. I've been at sites where you see they have actually physically 5 different people have a printout hard copy of the same drawing, all different red lines on them. So just even giving them that capability they're just truly amazed and thankful for that.
So ditto. But so I'm a little bit of a social person. So one of the things I think I find really enjoyable is not only just being helpful, because it's one of the things I like to be a helpful person. I like to solve problems, but it's the friendships and when you guys come here and I recognize faces. I'm not good with names, so sometimes you might see me stare at your tag for a second. But it's just the friendships and knowing that I've helped people and the difference in every site is different. Everyone always says, well, what's the typical? And there are some things that are typical, but every site is different. And it's that difference and that different people that I get to meet that really makes it enjoyable.
All right, thank you very much. Next question, can data card info be automatically transferred to a new document?
Yes, through extraction, right?
Copy.
Well, I think what you're looking
Copy
for,
with data card.
yeah, I mean, I think the big thing here is the automated word makes it difficult. Not automated yet, but there are tools in there to do it, and I think the biggest one is that copy data card, is the ability to pick up a data card that currently has information on it, and then when you push it to whatever document of choice, when you're doing your paste to it, the option to push the data to an extracted field is there, so it will push it into the document. As well, recently we did change data importer, so that if you use the data importer tool to bring data into documents, it will also update the document. So those are two ways that you can take data from another source and update the underlying document as well.
Okay, great. Next set of questions. Can we import workflows and company information with Excel format into Adept?
No. Well, from Excel importing directly in, I would say no. Not currently.
Yeah, you can't build workflows, but there's a word in this question, the company information. I believe now in 2018, you can use Excel and load your company information into the transmittal table,
Yes, that's right.
which is awesome.
Yeah, save a lot of time there.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Real quick, the Excel importer, you said updating the document, is that an option?
It is.
It is, yeah.
It's a checkbox in the lower right corner. So if you don't check it, then, but yeah, it's there.
Ask anyone who attended my class yesterday morning, I think, and they'll be able to show you how that works.
Okay, if I find a bug, how quick will Synergis fix it?
Gene?
Depends on how nice you are.
Gene, yeah.
I'd say it probably depends on the severity or, the urgency of the bug. If it's a tiny little bug, usually it's fixed by the next service pack. If it's a mission critical thing, we'll sometimes release hot fixes.
And even more so, we'll do one-offs. We
Yeah,
try not to, but if it is something that's affecting you, and so far you alone, but it is a stop, we will, I've had to be on sites where we've gotten that EXE and said, here, this fixes your problem, and when we update, that'll be in the new update.
Okay. How can I utilize Adept to organize and track projects?
So anyone who's been in any of my classes, right? The thing I always tell people, my favorite term is, or the one feature that I use the most, if anyone recalls, is unlinked records. So I tend to use unlinked records for projects. There's other ways that you can do to track projects. It's not a project system necessarily, right? But an unlinked record can simply be your project card or your project information and be the start point for every file that comes from there. The copy data card, being able to copy that project information and paste it to the drawings or the other documents that you're bringing in is one way to get that project information immediately so users don't have to type it all out. There's also the parent-child relationship that you can create to that project if you want to. So there's several different ways. I guess it depends on what is the right way for you. And then there's also just fields and being able to search those and file guides and being able to utilize those fields and be able to pull a file guide by project and be able to go right down that file guide and say, oh, this is the project I want. This is the information. I'm going to grab one of those files. So it's really what's the best fit for you. There's so many different ways to utilize Adept, right? I mean, once you get outside that box and start looking in, there's so many configurations. It's really getting to know what is the right fit for you. And if you're not sure, that's what we're here for.
I also like to use favorites list. I'll create a favorites list, name it Project XYZ. As the files get released for the use of that project, somebody just adds them to that favorites list. You can share the favorites list, of course, and then the list just grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
And for the people out here who are trying to consider how to manage it, I think I'll throw out the two biggest questions I ask folks when they ask a question like that on site is, how many projects do you do a year? Because it's hard to answer until we understand what kind of volume you're dealing with. Because as you can hear, some of these things may be very labor intensive. It take you a long time to constantly keep them set up, but you get a very controlled environment and a very happy environment with that. I know my aerospace companies are like, listen, it's worth the time. We do lots of projects, but they'll still make a library for each project, and they'll assign their users to each library, but it's worth it for them for that effort. Or you'll get people like, hey, we do so many, we could never keep up with that. So relying on understanding that you can lower your expectations of what the program is going to do for you, if you can't manage all the time it's going to take and deal with just getting the data in it so you can search on it quicker, building favorite lists can be much more rapid in developing it.
And that's where we come in too, right? Because our job is to try and find that balance for you guys and say, we don't want you to be working in here as an administrator 24/7 all the time where you're constantly creating project information, but at the same time, which is the right one that fits you? Is it libraries? Is it data? What's the right fit for you? And then I'll also add real quick, while we get into the favorites list, there's also the inbox now, where you can actually create your own groups of people. And then when you go to the inbox, you can actually add that group to your inbox manager. So for those who haven't done that before, when you go to say, I want to view someone's inbox, you can actually view a group, and you can group that by project. So I find it very simple to just create my groups by project, go to my inbox. Then I see a leaf for every project that I'm working on, and the people underneath those may be duplicated in other projects, but I'm going to a project and I want to see what people are working on for that project.
Another pro tip that I have for the favorites list is you get a comment field for your favorites. And so if you bundle your project files into a favorites list, you can identify the phase or the milestone of that project, whether it's a 30, 60, 90 review, and the owner of that favorites list can update that comment field.
We have a question here, Eric.
Did we have a
Yeah,
question?
Don?
Oh, yes, right here. Question at the second table.
One of the things that we've done at Lucite for projects is we actually created a project folder where those projects go in there for the project manager, the files that we store long term, not the stuff that we're just using for reference.
Sure.
We also have a folder outside of Adept for those fluff files that will eventually go away when the project's done. We've also added on our data card a project's data card to put in the project number, so on and so forth. And we also utilize transmittals for the projects and favorites and saved searches.
I'll add to that. One of the hardships that I run into a lot is you've got one drawing that's used on multiple projects. So if you've got that one drawing, to me, it doesn't make sense to put it into one project library because then you're going to end up having to have a copy, just like you have to do in Windows. So, but if your project files are one-to-one, they're only used on one project, that works perfectly.
We use the versioning on the project files, the project drawing, for example.
Cool.
Because each version has its own unique library card, we can fill that library card out with its unique project number. And then when we do a new project, it gets the new project number and the project number field. So if we need to go back and search that, we can search the versions database or the versions area to find that project information, or that, there's different ways to do that, the searching on that.
So you move it from a project to another project?
Well, there's two ways, and again, I'm just gonna use drawings, for example. We have, for our drawings, we create two drawings. We create the as-built and we create a project drawing. The project drawing is the WIP version that they're working on, and it's always appended with a -P to separate it from the as-built. We also have another field that says the status of the drawing, whether it's as-built, for construction, out for information.
Sure.
So on and so forth, so that we know the status of what that drawing is and what they're doing with it. When the designer gets done with the drawing, he makes a copy of the finished drawing, renames it to the as-built, Adept. This is a duplicate. We acquire ownership, acquire checkout, and to make it the latest and greatest, it copies the information from the library for that as-built. They update the revision number, check that in. Now, for a little while, we have a duplicate of the as-built and the project. They're the same, but that project file is just a project. And when we do a new project, it gets versioned. We still have a version of the project drawing, but it's all kept separate.
Cool.
Interesting.
One more question?
Well, to add on that, I was thinking the unlinked record for each project number, unlinked record for each project number, and then you manually create that to all the files for that project. And we often, like this year, released several new area light products, and a lot of them do part sharing. And so you get attach that record, each one of those project records to all those files, and then you should be able to do a file guide for that, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
So that would be a quick way to get that, because there's always part sharing. We all want to do one part for all kinds of products and get that cost advantage. So I was thinking that would work, right?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think the answer was yes.
Yeah. Thanks,
You know,
Brian.
I don't know.
Thank you very much. We're almost out of time. We do have just a couple minutes. We're going to very quickly do the last two questions here. So is there a plan to charge for the API?
No.
Real quick? No. Okay?
We went and asked too. We're not just making that up. We saw that one and we made sure.
Yeah, we're not in a hurry. We're just. Well, there you go.
Donations.
My PayPal
And then the
account
very
is-
last question that we're going to be able to cover today is, what is the most common misuse of Adept? If we can summarize real quickly.
Sure. Most common misuse is to use Adept only as a repository and not take advantage of any of the additional functionality. I see that I don't see it very often, thank goodness.
But when you say, yeah, you see people struggling and you're like, I can help you with all the things you're saying you're struggling with if you just start using it for some other things.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience, and I know there's probably some more questions. Reach out to us later. And thank you to the ACs.